On August 23rd, a man named Jacob Blake was shot 7 times in the back by a police officer in what appears to be a blatant use of excessive force. People bring up that the suspect had a knife somewhere in his possession, but can't explain why he made no attempt to use the knife, or why a cop who is allegedly concerned about a knife-wielding assailant would get close enough to grab his shirt and then pump 7 shots into his back at point-blank range. But this video isn't about that incident, it's about the aftermath. Protests broke out in Kenosha, Wisconsin, which escalated into riots. Riots, as we know, are not good or just, but are the natural and predictable outcome of ignoring long-term systematic mistreatment. As MLK said, a riot is the language of the unheard. A riot is like a hurricane, except, unlike a hurricane, we can actually do something to prevent it. On the left, the solution to riots is to hear the grievances and do something to tackle the societal issues that led to the unrest. On the right, the solution is to just shoot the rioters, as evidenced by much of the rhetoric online, where right-wing militias have been quasi-joking about gunning down protesters and running them over with their hillbilly trucks. They don't want to solve the actual problem, they just want to put bullets in the symptoms. This whole kill the baddies mentality leads us to Kyle Rittenhouse, shown here looking like a dork in American flag Crocs holding his penis substitute. This kid was radicalized by both his parents and dishonest online discourse, and somehow came to the conclusion that it was his right and duty to go protect property he doesn't own in a city he doesn't live in so he could undermine the rule of law and the policy of democratically elected officials. And although I hate to speculate on people's motives, protecting property just seems to be a veiled excuse for provoking attacks, specifically aimed towards lefties and anti-racist protesters and rioters too, because I haven't seen any of these militias traveling across state lines to fight the KKK or white power terrorists. They don't go to poor neighborhoods and protect civilians from gangbangers. They don't go to Mexico and fight the cartels. And they very well could. The Mormons send dudes down to Mexico to fight cartels. But these militias don't seem interested in fighting any of those bad guys. It seems as though their entire intention is focused on people who damage property in a bid to bring attention to their oppression. They have BLM and Antifa derangement syndrome. They don't care about order or justice. They are more than willing to increase the disorder and injustice as long as it owns the libs. Now, the details are still coming out at this time, so a lot of this is subject to change. But what we do know thus far is that Kyle Rittenhouse decides in his Rambo fantasy that it's on him to go resolve the riot himself. Maybe he is really delusional enough to believe he's helping, or maybe he just wanted to play Judge Dredd in the middle of a riot. It's unclear at this time if he took a rifle and transported it across state lines, or if he obtained the rifle from someone who was already there. But he clearly had the intent and expectation for battle. And this is where things start to get weird, because conservative talking heads like Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson have been trying to defend this kid as if he's some innocent, benevolent protector, rather than a cross-state instigator. They do some Olympic-level mental gymnastics in order to justify every poor choice Kyle made.
So are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated to murder?
Yeah, Tucker. All of us sane people living in a civil society are surprised. Because typically riots cause a lot of property damage, but have low mortality rates. Tell me this, Tucker. How many deaths were there in Kenosha before your heroic vigilante child militia showed up?
How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?
Again, very shocked, Tucker. A normal, well-adjusted 17-year-old should be out riding skateboards and playing video games. No 17-year-old ought to, nor is cognitively able to, assess a situation like this and unilaterally handle it. And it's funny to me that a right-wing bootlicker like Tucker here normally is all about the rule of law and obeying orders of the hierarchy of authority. But suddenly all that goes out the window when he thinks his supposed team is winning. From what I can tell, the mayor basically told the police to stand down in order to prevent the situation from escalating from property damage to physical altercations. Insurance covers property. Property can be replaced after the fact. People's lives, however, cannot. This is a tactical move many in government will make in a situation like this. It's common de-escalation. The danger to both the police and the civilians themselves is too high, so they hang back and let the riot move through, like a hurricane. They do the same thing when a high-speed chase becomes too reckless. They rather let the driver escape than risk people's lives. But when it's minorities and leftists causing a ruckus, suddenly Tucker is okay with any random vigilantes showing up and subverting everything the local government is trying to do tactically. For some reason, the hierarchy he supposedly reveres so much doesn't matter now. Imagine you were on a battlefield and General Patton had a plan of attack, but suddenly some civilian militiamen go rogue and do the exact opposite of the plan. That would be unacceptable. Systems don't work if you just let any goofball enforce the law as they see fit. That's why vigilantism is generally illegal in the first place. The average citizen doesn't have the cognitive ability to determine what is actually just in an unbiased manner.
Everyone could see what was happening in Kenosha. It was getting crazier by the hour. Watch this scene from last night.
Kill the police! Kill them back! Kill them back for taking this! Kill the police for taking us! Death to America!
Kill the police, death to America. That's not Iran, it's Wisconsin.
This is laughable. People were murdered by a right-wing lunatic, and Tucker's best examples of the lawless madness that justifies it is people talking shit. Literally words and a small burning dollar store American flag. They didn't go with burning businesses or footage of windows being smashed. They went with footage of some anti-American rhetoric, because jingoistic pseudo-patriotism is of the utmost importance to his fucking base. And a lot of these so-called pundits online are putting up puff pieces about how Kyle came there just to help, because he's such a good and benevolent little Boy Scout. They cite the fact that he helped paint over some graffiti and offered some EMT services as evidence of his innocent intentions. First of all, bad people can do good things sometimes. I can point out how Hitler kissed babies and passed animal welfare laws. Doesn't absolve him as a person at all. Secondly, a couple of mildly altruistic gestures don't make up for the knowing fatal intentionality of bringing a semi-automatic rifle with lethal rounds to a place he knows he's going to antagonize already angry people. There are things that ostensibly ought to be known. Going to a riot with a gun to act as a wannabe cop would be like going to a black church wearing a Klansman outfit and a gun. And when people in the church confront you about your outfit, you decide you feel threatened and you shoot them all. The situation wouldn't have happened if you didn't show up, and it wouldn't have escalated if you didn't have the gun.
So you had non-lethal, but you didn't respond.
We don't have non-lethal. We don't have non-lethal. We don't have non-lethal.
These are not the words of an altruistic, benevolent defender that is concerned about the welfare of people. And of course, right-wingers are trying to claim it's justified self-defense because we don't have video of the instigation and therefore don't know exactly how the incident started. But the lack of video doesn't help his case any more than it hurts it. Testimony thus far is that Rittenhouse and the Dumbsh militia were at a car dealership and were confronted by a group of protesters. Insults are exchanged and allegedly one of the militia throws the first punch. Others say someone else brained them first. Either way, the militia disperses, leaving Rittenhouse on his own. When we finally do get some video, we see a man approaching Kyle as Kyle's trying to escape the area. It is unclear if Kyle has hurt anyone at this point, but nobody seems to be advancing on him quickly like you would expect if they were chasing him down to hurt him. We see a man throw an object towards Kyle, which many try to claim was a Molotov cocktail, because, you know, they don't give a shit about facts. Now, at first glance, I can see how the orange coloring could be mistaken for fire, but only at a cursory glance. Clearly, this object is not giving off light as fire would, and is casting a solid shadow on both the bottle end and the fire end, which wouldn't be the case if it was actually fire. It also falls harmlessly to the ground with no flame. The bottle is seen in another video from a better angle, laying on the ground, and is quite clearly an empty bottle in a plastic bag. The man approaching Kyle throws the bottle and taunts him, to which Kyle responds by unloading multiple shots into him. As seen in the video, the man does sort of speed walk towards Kyle, which likely spooked the kid, but he's not close enough to constitute an immediate threat to Kyle's life, and he has not shown any lethal intent. And all he objectively did at this point was follow Kyle and throw a bottle in his direction. Firing multiple times, one of which being a knowingly fatal shot to the head, is not only excessive force, but shows that his intention was to kill this unarmed man. Now, a lot of right-wingers are trying to defend him by claiming there was a gunshot fired at him around the same time. There are multiple problems with this claim, though. The alleged gunshot was purported to be in the air, not at Kyle, which makes it a warning shot. A wannabe cop pretend military kid like Kyle would be aware of what a warning shot is, and that it's not an attempt to kill you, it's a signal to halt. And how could anyone think that simply hearing a gunshot suddenly justifies turning around and shooting the closest person to you multiple times? What if I'm outside and a car exhaust backfires and it sounds like a gunshot? In my irrational fear, am I now allowed to shoot the closest person? If you're gonna shoot someone, especially knowingly lethal shots, you better be damn sure your life was in immediate peril. I'm not sure all the laws in Wisconsin, I'm not sure if there's a duty to retreat or not, but what I do know is that there is no stand your ground law there. He wasn't on his own property or in a vehicle, so the castle doctrine wouldn't apply here either. As far as I know, Wisconsin law doesn't allow private militia activity and prohibits citizens from acting and taking on functions of a public officer. Remember that a militia is supposed to defend against tyranny, not local crime fighting. As lax as the laws on self-defense may be in America, Rittenhouse, as far as I can tell, didn't have reasonable grounds to believe the bag-throwing guy was about to administer great bodily harm, and he was the one who provocated it in the first place. He and his group brought assault rifles to a place where nobody else had anything of the sort. So from the jump, he was already wielding a disproportionate amount of force compared to anything that he could be confronted with. And people online were trying to tell me it's okay because it was an open carry state. But open carry doesn't mean free to use for any reason you want. And from what I hear, he wasn't even old enough to legally have the gun in that state. Which is funny to me because his supporters think it's okay that he went to Kenosha to shoot criminals when he himself was breaking the law. And therefore, by their own absurd standard, he deserves to be shot by vigilantes, right? So at this point, Kyle has murdered a man who likely didn't meet the requirements necessary to justify lethal force. Kyle also attempts to flee the scene of the crime, which itself is also a crime. He is now an active shooter, and the mob is chasing him down to attempt to stop him. Now, it's impossible to tell the motives of a mob, since it is multiple people, but from the footage we have seen, nobody made any attempt to kill or seriously harm Kyle. By all accounts, they were simply chasing him down to stop him from shooting anyone else. And this is evidenced by the fact that one man pulled out a pistol but never fired a shot. Kyle is running away and trips like a woman in a horror movie, and then he panics. While on the ground, a dude with a skateboard attempts to truck fuck him, but gets shot. Now, I've been hit with a skateboard before. It's not fatal. You see, when you commit a crime, you can no longer claim self-defense. Shooting people now becomes another murder in the commission of the original crime. When you commit a violent crime like that, people are within their right to detain you. It's a citizen's arrest, and as long as you are using reasonable force to detain the assailant, you are both legally and morally justified in doing so. Despite what the internet lawyers seem to think, you can't shoot a person detaining you on a citizen's arrest. Not only do they have the right to do so, detainment is not causing bodily harm. So the so-called mob in Kenosha showed a pretty reasonable level of force in detaining an active shooter, to be honest. Like, imagine if you were robbing a bank and you shot someone. You can't just shoot everyone else who tries to stop you and then claim you were defending yourself. At that point, you're not defending yourself. You're killing people to try and ensure your escape. That's what Kyle was doing. He felt that he was mature enough to go play the Punisher on the streets of Kenosha, but wasn't man enough to stick around and face the consequences. You know, a better example is if I walked up to you on the street and lipped off, and when you turn around and lip off back to me, I go ahead and shoot your dog. Then when you get upset and walk over to confront me about shooting your dog, I shoot you as well. And then I claim it's self-defense because I felt threatened. The reality is, you are the one defending yourself and your dead dog. I was the aggressor, not the defender. The aggressor doesn't suddenly become the defender just because he starts losing. But anyway, as I was saying before, the man who was chasing Kyle had a pistol, and he had plenty of opportunity while he was chasing Kyle to unload it in his back. But he didn't. He could have shot him on the ground too, but again, he chose not to. Instead, he attempts to hold him at gunpoint, like a cop in a movie, hoping that Kyle would just surrender when he saw the pistol. For that tactical mistake, he lost his arm, and in retrospect, he is allowed to regret not taking the shot. People online are erroneously claiming that he intended to shoot Kyle, but as far as I can tell from articles I've read, that is not the case. He just regrets not doing it. He never said he had the intention of doing it, and his actions prove he didn't. And that's the difference between Kyle and normal, well-adjusted members of society. Most people don't want to shoot other people. Most people aren't sitting there like, oh, I wish a motherfucker would, I can't wait! You know? Most people want to have criminals taken alive and face trial for their crimes. Most people don't want criminals to be handled by vigilantes with no authority, no accountability to the community, and no common sense. This guy, despite whatever personal problems he had, acted heroically, while Kyle acted in cowardice. I mean, what's more brave to you? Attempting to take a criminal in alive, or just shooting him dead the second you see him? What is more brave to you? Showing up to a protest armed to the teeth, or with no weapons at all? People seem to have a strange concept of what bravery and strength are. It takes more strength to reason with your enemies than to kill them. It takes more bravery to face danger with an open arm than with a closed fist. Rittenhouse isn't by any means a brave defender that had to protect himself. He's a vigilante that instigated and exacerbated an already volatile situation and knowingly did so. He has no love for law and order. He sowed chaos and did so unlawfully, in direct juxtaposition to what actual police were ordered to do. What he loves is authority, because he is also a victim. Remember, he's only 17. This kid was brainwashed by everyone around him to glorify this sort of stupid shit. Part of the American ideal is that there is a system of law and order, and that everyone gets their day in court. When you send vigilante gunmen into a riot, you clearly don't care about people getting their day in court. You're not a supporter of the rule of law, and you don't care about order when they're using disorderly methods. And sadly, the police in Kenosha are with them on this. I say that because police normally try and clear civilians out of a riot area. The police normally tell vigilantes to leave because they are a liability. If there was a hostage situation and you and your buddies just showed up with weapons to help, the police would immediately tell you to go home and that you're not helping. Not only that, but according to several news outlets, a group of volunteers on a bus on their way to deliver food and water to protesters was stopped by police and detained. Apparently, the police considered them suspicious. Ah, that's funny. Apparently stopping for gas is suspicious if you support the protesters. But bringing semi-automatic rifles to a riot isn't suspicious at all if you don't support the protests. The bias of the police should be glaring at this point. For some reason, the Kenosha police were perfectly okay with letting unregulated armed vigilantes come in, after curfew, to suppress rioters for them. The police knew, or ought to have known, that the presence of armed vigilantes would escalate the situation, and it shows that even the police were more concerned with property damage than they were with protecting people's lives. So if you're okay with this, why not just let everyone in America go to Kenosha and solve the problem however they see fit? Do you not see the issue with this? Again, I don't care how you feel about rioters as people, or what they're doing and how just it is. They are owed a day in court, not summary execution. Like, what was Rittenhouse's plan? If he pointed the gun and told them not to riot, and they didn't listen, was his next step always opening fire? Or was he just a limp dick paper tiger trying to scare people? Either way, he had no business being there, and nobody deserved to get shot. But bootlickers often tend to be the same people who sociopathically can't wait for someone to do something wrong, so they could shoot them. Shooting someone seems to be on their bucket list. And does that sound like the goal of a sane, well-adjusted human being, or an emotionally unstable lunatic? So to summarize, Rittenhouse was not justified in the level of force he used, and is at very least guilty of intentional homicide. Although I predict they'll go easy on him because of his bootlicker persona. Kyle went there knowing what would likely happen as a result of his actions, prepared for those actions, and provoked the situation towards that end. All of which demonstrates some level of intentionality. Kyle, who claimed he was there to help and administer medical assistance, shoots a man in the head and then doesn't offer any medical help. The police were complicit in this, and anybody who supports Kyle or any vigilante action like this is not in support of law and order and not in support of the police. How can you claim to be about the thin blue line if you are undermining the police and their orders? Oh yeah, because you're arrogant enough to think your assessment of the situation is all that matters, and that justifies unilateral action. If that's the case, you do not support the rule of law. And to top it all off, just the other night some Patriot Prayer Trump supporter got shot in Portland. Allegedly, he sprayed mace in a dude's face and got capped for it. If that's true, the Patriot Prayer guy was likely in the wrong, but mace isn't fatal and therefore responding with lethal force wasn't justified. It's funny how the political motivations of the victim had no sway in my opinion here. But apparently no matter how much the shooter overreacts, it's just self-defense now by your own stupid standard, so don't worry about it. It doesn't matter if the use of force is completely disproportionate. If someone steps on your toe, it's totally cool to shoot them dead now. I really hope you enjoy this caveman precedent you set. When protesters see these guys in their jacked up trucks, with their Trump flags, driving into Portland, getting recklessly close to the crowds and firing paintballs, they'd be totally justified in gunning down every one of those rednecks as they drove by. If hearing a loud bang and seeing a man approach him with a bag was enough to spook Kyle Rittenhouse into a justified shooting in self-defense, then I'm sure that seeing people barrel towards you in trucks firing unidentified weapons at the crowd would be equally just cause for shooting them dead, right? Surely you wouldn't have a bias in this based on your political motivations, would you?